Hey everybody, welcome to another fun-filled video from my office to your home. This week we're talking about methods and theory in anthropology, and I want to say first off the bat that you should not be alarmed when you've read through the material from the text for this week. It spends an awful lot of time on anthropological theory, and that section of the chapter really could be a class all on its own. So we will hit some of the high points of that, but we're going to spend more time in this short video today on methods, which is going to be more applicable really to the material we're talking about over the course of this course, and we'll hit just the high points on theory. Okay, so first we're going to talk about what ethnography is. You may remember from our first video that the actual linguistic parts of that word are writing about culture, right? So ethnography is field experience in another society. This started because anthropologists went away to faraway places where small groups of people lived in what we thought of as isolation, right? So there wasn't a lot of written material about them. And the way that we learned about these folks is by going and living with them and doing what they do. And in doing that, anthropologists applied this holistic approach. They would go to, X specific, small, isolated culture and study every single thing about their culture because they thought of all those things as being connected. And that is part of the anthropological holistic approach. So that included some things. Direct, personal, first-hand observation, which means I don't send my research assistant out to do my research for me and have them bring back some notes and then I write about it. It means conversation with the folks that actually live there, which means, for instance, that you needed to learn the language of those people. It means the genealogical method, where folks figured out how to make charts of who was related to who, and you'd think that would be a simple question, but it's really not. We're going to spend most of a chapter on that later on when we do kinship. It included detailed work with key consultants. You're doing some reading about that in our reader this week as well. In-depth interviewing, problem-oriented research. I'm trying to answer X question, and that's why I'm asking all these questions. Longitudinal research, or research over time, and team research. The main methodology of anthropology is participant observation, which, there's a whole bunch of explanation about this in your text, but really it's going and hanging out with people and doing what they do. Part of this is keeping a personal diary where you make detailed notes of who you talked to and what they said. Strive to establish rapport or make a connection with people so they feel like they can trust you and they can talk to you. And it's important to note that an ethnographer cannot be totally impartial and detached. Part of becoming a participant observer is making friends and making family out of the folks that you study. We do this through conversations and interviews. Anthropologists are kind of fundamentally nosy. They want to know, what do you call that thing that you do? Why do you do it? Who do you do it with? And they do that through learning the names of things, ethnographic surveys, and interview schedules, which is an interview schedule. So if you're a sociologist, you might make a survey, which is, I'm going to ask you this question, and you have to choose amongst these answers that I've already given you. Anthropologists instead do something called open-ended questions. So you come up with a question that leaves a lot of space for the people to tell you what their experience is like. So for instance, a sociologist might say, my experience of being in this class is, and then it gives you a scale from 1 to 10, and 1 is lousy and 10 is great, okay? And you would have to pick one of those. An anthropologist trying to elicit the same thing might ask you a bunch of questions like, so compared to other classes that you've taken at Wake Tech, how do you feel about this one? Did you enjoy the content? What were your favorite parts of this class? And through that, try to come up with a more rounded sense of how you felt about the class in general. Anthropologists also use the genealogical method, using diagrams and symbols to record kin connections. This is a prominent building block in non-industrial societies, where the kin network is the basic building block of everything. That's still the case even in the US and many rural societies. Anthropologists used to use these things they called key informants, and then they decided that that was a bad term. So now we call them key cultural consultants. But that is, who are the people in this society who are going to be able to tell you the most information? Who can you make a good bond with? And you can think, as you're working through this part of the chapter, about that article that we read on fieldwork in the age of AIDS, right? The author speaks about her key consultants, some of whom, I think she uses the term key informants, some of whom were pimps, some of whom were prostitutes, all of whom either thought they had or actually had lots of information about the groups. A lot of times these key consultants, instead of being someone who's like in charge in the society, is someone who is sort of on the border of the society, because those folks are more likely to be watching everything. They also spend some time doing life histories, finding out the events of somebody's life can point to things that are important in that culture that might not be important in other cultures. Now, you remember I was saying that anthropologists historically have always tried to look at communities using this holistic approach. So they looked at everything. What's your family like? Let's talk about economics. What's trade like there? How long do people live? What's a puberty ritual like? What do you like to eat? But now, as there have been less and less of those small-scale societies who are not yet studied, anthropology tends to do more problem-oriented ethnography, where they go into the field with a specific question that they're looking for the answers of, like, how did fracking in the region where you live affect your life, right? In the fieldwork article, you can think for yourself about what's the problem that the author is investigating. They didn't really go in necessarily to say what is everything about the life of a prostitute in this particular area, in this particular time. But they are trying to hit all the aspects of life that impact that behavior. Anthropologists also use longitudinal research, which means they go back over time again and again to the same area. Sometimes that's multiple people who are working together as a team. Sometimes it's different anthropologists, and there's been some really great stuff that we'll talk about later on in the class about people going to study one area and then somebody follows, and because again we're doing science here, right, you want to get repeatable results, but a second anthropologist goes into the field and gets completely different results looking at the same topic. Juicy anthropological drama. We'll be talking about that some more later. Plus, anthropologists also use a little bit of those methodologies that other folks use, like survey research, like a little bit of maybe census data, or other forms of statistical analysis, but that's never going to be the center of their research. The center of their research, participant observation. Now we're going to talk here about approaches to ethnography. There's two. One's emic and one's etic, and everybody gets them confused. But emic is looking at a culture with the point of view of an insider. So you're not saying, what do I, as the researcher, think is the most important here? It's, what does this person tell me about the way that they experience the world? An etic approach is the opposite. It's trying to look at it through the eyes of a scientist. What is the problem? What do I, the researcher, see as the problem? What are solutions that might be put into place? Now, an anthropologist, oh my goodness, might choose to use either of these, right? Or they might choose to use a little bit of both. But generally speaking, they choose one or the other. And they each have some pitfalls. The emic perspective, people can find themselves getting a little bit too caught up in their relationships with the people in the field and can lose their sense of objective distance. With the etic approach, we have a lot of trouble with an ethnocentric point of view, right? I think this is important because it would be important in my culture. Or I think this is important because it would be a good answer to my research question that I came into in the field. And these two approaches are closely tied to the idea of is anthropology science or humanities, right? Okay. Also, it's important to note that over time we've had a certain expansion in analytical scale, right? Instead of looking at this one small community or culture, thinking of it as being isolated in time and space, we're much more interested in ethnography that's multi-timed and multi-sited, looking specifically at things like the African diaspora and people that ended up all over the world, Or what is happening to native cultures now as folks are moving back and forth off of the reservation. Anthropology is interested in people in motion, not just people standing still, and we no longer think that there are these idea of cultural survivals, this little pocket of people who are frozen in time and space. Anthropologists also have to deal with ethical issues as they are working through their material. They have to be sensitive to cultural differences and aware of procedures and standards in their host country. That's if they're working abroad. They need to be sure to be interacting with the host country while they're planning their research. They need to establish collaborative relationships and make sure that they are sharing their information with the folks that they're working with. So it's not me, white person, I'm using that example because I am, of course, a white person. I'm going to go to this place and study these people, and then I'm going to take my research and I'm going to write books and I'm going to make money out of that. No, maybe that research that I'm doing has some useful piece of information around subsistence patterns and how folks could maybe make, if they wanted to, make a change in one of the ways that they grow food, or might need some tools around that, because they want to make sure that they are giving something back to the folks that are being studied. You also want to think about, how do you do this at home? How do you make sure, if you're working in the US or in the country of origin, whatever it is, that you are being ethical, that you are having a collaborative relationship with the folks that you are studying. And again, this goes back to our article that we read on prostitution in the age of AIDS, right, in which the author talks at length about how she establishes a connection with these women and how she is sharing information back and forth with them, that she can't really just have an impartial observer stance or nobody's going to talk to her. Anthropologists are held under the Code of Ethics of the American Anthropological Association. That's our governing body. And they are required, when they are doing research in the field, to make sure that all of their research subjects have on file an informed consent, which is an agreement to take part in the research after having been informed about what it's going to be like, how it's going to operate, and how it might affect them. This came out of medical research having to have informed consent. And so sometimes there's some weird little bobbles between